Geeks and geekettes, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Ask Chuck Dixon, where you get to ask me, a world-renowned, world-famous, well-regarded, celebrated everywhere I go, comic book writer. Well, you get to ask me questions about what I do for a living, and what I do for a living is I write comic books. Let's get right to it. M.L. Miller. I don't think I've ever heard you talk about the Creeper. I've always been fascinated with the character, but no one since Ditko seems to be able to do him right. Maybe because people just see him as the Joker with agility. I don't think you have written a character, or have you? What are your thoughts on the Creeper? I dug the Creeper when it first came out. Unfortunately, Ditko, as I've learned recently, became ill in this period, which is why he left both the Creeper and Hawk and the Dove, creations of his, at DC Comics. I think he was looking to make a fresh start after getting screwed over by Marvel on Spider-Man. He's looking to make a fresh start at DC, create a whole bunch of new franchises for them, but unfortunately, Mr. Ditko fell ill, and eventually recovered and did more work, but never really came back as strong as he did in this period. His best work was behind him after the Creeper and Hawk and the Dove. His best work being Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, and his amazing work at Warren Publishing. I dug the Creeper. I thought it was cool. I thought it had a lot of possibilities. They all sort of fell apart when Ditko left. I felt both franchises, Creeper and Hawk and the Dove, were going somewhere, but they never got to go there. And as far as writing the Creeper, no, I never wrote the Creeper, although I wanted to. Graham Nolan and I, a number of times, said that we would like to use the Creeper in a Batman story during our detective run. And we came up with various scenarios where the Creeper's appearance would have made sense. And each time we were told no, that the Creeper was off limits. And we were never told why. And as I've said often, if you're a regular listener or viewer of these videos, you'll have heard this before. DC's a weird company with lots of weird secrets. They had backroom deals and sweetheart deals and holds on characters and moratoriums on characters. This will be further addressed as I answer another question upcoming. So they wouldn't let us use him, but never gave us a reason why. It's a mystery, but yeah, I would have loved to have written it in at least one arc in Detective. Sadly, wasn't going to happen. James Leroy, what are your thoughts on Batman Beyond? I grew up watching the show and reading the subsequent comics after the show had ended. What are your thoughts on Bruce Wayne, Batman's future? Is it happy or tragic? Well, I liked Batman Beyond. My kids were just the right age. They were still watching cartoons on Saturday morning, and I'd sit and watch them with them. And, I think particularly my youngest really dug Batman Beyond. I thought it was a worthy effort. I mean, it's Paul Dini and Bruce Timm, certainly guys who have a lot of respect for the source material. And I think they did a great job of updating and making a futuristic version of Gotham with lots of callbacks to previous continuity, lots of great new villains and such like that. As far as the fate of Batman, and Batman, Bruce Wayne's never going to have what we would call a happy ending. He's always going to be a troubled soul. But I thought this was a good sort of, bittersweet sort of apt future for Batman as mentor to a new character, a new iteration of Batman in the future. And it was kind of cool seeing Bruce Wayne as a tough old guy, a geezer. Michael Scotty, what's your favorite Batman villain, and was there ever a Batman villain you wanted to write but never had the opportunity to? The Riddler will always be my favorite Batman villain. I just like him a whole lot, and as I've said in other videos, and I won't go into depth here again, he's a very, very difficult character to write. So even though he was my favorite Batman villain, I didn't write him very often in Detective because I felt that there was the bar for a successful Riddler story was high. and it took a lot of work. And there were only a couple of occasions where I was willing to willing to put the time in to what I felt would be a proper Riddler story. Although I had to make lots of cameos and guest appearances and things like that in various stories, I really only ever wrote what I would consider 2 actual Riddler stories. But I dig him the most. I like him a lot. Now again, DC and its weird secrets, a villain that we all wanted to use. Doug Mensch wanted to use him. Alan Grant wanted to use him. I wanted to use him. We thought that Nightfall would be the perfect place to reintroduce this character. The character called The Wrath, who was introduced in a Batman one-shot special. It was created by Mike Barr and Michael Golden. And each time we were told there was a freeze on the character, there was a moratorium on the character, we would not be allowed to use him. Just forget about the Wrath. You're not going to be able to use him. And the Wrath was so cool because he was like a criminal version of Batman. He was what the Killer Moth wanted to be. But the Wrath was extremely dangerous, tough guy. As you can see here, he kicks Batman's butt pretty readily. And all of us wanted to use him and were denied constantly. It was very frustrating. And once again, never told why. Just, no, you can't use him. Hey, have you subscribed? Please subscribe. And even if you have subscribed, check and see if your subscription has been canceled by YouTube. I'm hearing more and more from people saying that they have to resubscribe every couple of months. This channel's been around a couple of years, and just by sheer mathematics, although I'm not a mathematics whiz, I should have a lot more subscribers by now, because the more subscribers you get, theoretically, the more geometric the rate of increase in your subscribers should be. And yet I'm always seeing a 2 steps forward, 1 step back growth in my subscriptions. I think there's deviltry afoot. I think there's dirty work at the crossroads here at YouTube. And I don't know how much longer I can stay in this venue. If this is going to be the rules. I've already taken the ads off, so YouTube has absolutely no incentive to help me increase my subscription list. They're not making a dime off of these videos. So, but I would like to see the channel grow. I would like to reach more people. I would like to get more folks into the circle here. So tell your friends. Oh, Stephen Lolito. I hope you're doing well. My youngest son, Ezra, loves the DC cartoon Bat Wheels, a show where a bunch of bat-themed cars are the main characters. One of the characters is Robin's car, Redbird. After seeing how much of a prominent character he is in the show, and the fact that my boy has a toy of him that he keeps near him when he watches, I can't help but wonder, did DC throw you and Tom Grummett any cheddar for using your idea? All the other characters have random names like BB for Batbike, Bam, and Buff. But it appears DC couldn't resist but keep that name and theme. Tom Grummett and I do have participation in any vehicle called Redbird. And I have to thank Frank Pittarese, who was, I think, an associate editor at the time at DC, for coming up with the name. Because we were looking for we didn't want the Robin Mobile. We didn't want anything generic. We wanted a name that fit Robin. And Frank Pittarese suggested, I believe, to Jordan Gorfinkel, that Redbird would be a great name for Robin's car. And so even if Robin's vehicle is a motorcycle or a skateboard or whatever, if it's called Redbird, Tom Grummett and I get a piece. And I've told the story before, but it's been a while. I submitted a drawing for Tom to use for the Redbird to show its transforming abilities, because the Redbird, if you remember, can go from street legal to crime fighting machine with the pressing of a few buttons on the dashboard. And so I drew a schematic, a very, very simple schematic, because I'm not a very good artist, of how that would work. And when it came time for licensing, they said, hey, you need to fill out participation form on this. And they said, we need a drawing of it, a separate drawing. And I didn't want to submit mine because Tom was going to be the regular artist on the book, and he would be the first person drawing the Redbird. The Redbird appears in the very first arc of Robin's new monthly title. And so I called Tom and said, why don't you do a quick drawing based on my drawing? And he said, no, your drawing's good enough. And I said, no, Tom, you don't understand. If you don't do the drawing, I'll get all the money if it becomes a toy. You have to do the drawing. So we'll split 50-50. To me, it's only fair. And it took a while to convince him. And I'm sure now he's very glad he did because, we saw quite a bit of royalties off of the Redbird from the Batman and Robin movie because Robin's motorcycle was called Redbird and they sold a whole ton of toys in addition to this little corgi model, which I imagine is the one your son has. But yeah, cool stuff. Cool stuff. And DC did take care of us. So you can rest easy. Joshua Ignatowski, what do you think of the portrayal of Dr. Watson's character, in the Basil Rathbone Sherlock Holmes movies from the 30s and 40s? I share the same opinion as everybody else. Nigel Bruce was funny and as a bumbling Dr. Watson, but I keep wanting to refer to the banjo player. He's bumbling and funny and effective as Dr. Watson in the Basil Rathbone movies, but it's completely inaccurate. It's a completely inaccurate portrayal. First of all, Watson and Holmes were closer in age. Nigel Bruce is obviously supposed to be a bit older than Basil Rathbone here, and he's a bit dumber. You wonder how he graduated from medical school, how he ever became a surgeon, if he was this clueless, literally, so often in the Sherlock Holmes movies. I think it was lazy writing. I think it made it easier if Holmes was so much smarter than Watson to have the exposition scenes where Holmes explains everything that's going on. So he's explaining to an idiot, and I think maybe the filmmakers thought Dr. Watson was a stand-in for the morons in the audience who might not understand what Holmes was talking about. So that Dr. Watson was asking the questions the audience was asking, and Holmes was answering them as simply as he could so that Dr. Watson could understand them. But yeah, not an accurate portrayal. Certainly entertaining, but in no way accurate because Watson, in his own way, was every bit as much of an intellectual as Holmes, and quite often suggested things. I mean, he was an apt partner, not a sidekick, but a partner for Holmes because his medical knowledge, and he had an analytical mind, and if you read the stories, he would often come up with angles that perhaps Holmes had not thought of. Holmes was not infallible in the original stories. Hey, Joshua gets a twin spin. This is becoming a tradition. Joshua always gets a twin spin. It's really neat how in Transformers Hearts of Steel, one of the prominent human characters to meet the Transformers face-to-face was Mark Twain. What inspired you to choose him specifically as a character for the story? I wrote a project for IDW setting the Transformers back in the days of the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in the 1800s, and I wanted them to meet some real-life historical characters. And I thought Twain was perfect because Twain sort of looked to the cosmos. Twain famously said that he was born when Halley's Comet arrived and he would depart with it. And oddly enough, 75 years later, Twain died while Halley's Comet was in the sky. So he kind of looked out toward those things, dabbling even in science fiction. Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court is very much a time travel story. His last novel to be published, The Mysterious Stranger, which was to be published only after his death, has a lot of science fiction and horror elements to it. If you've ever read it, it's a very, very disturbing story about a child who apparently turns out to be either a demon or the devil. And it's really cosmic. It's a really surreal story. It's unlike anything Twain had ever written before. It's quite obvious why he didn't want it published during his lifetime, because it would have been quite controversial. I think published after his death, it didn't receive as much notice. But if you ever get a chance to read The Mysterious Stranger, it is, it's worth, well, all of Twain is worth reading, but that particular oddity, because it doesn't get republished very often. Triple spin for Mr. Ignatowski. Okay, here you go. Would you rather write a crossover story between Doc Savage and Tarzan or Doc Savage and John Carter? As much as I love John Carter, I never miss an opportunity to write Tarzan. I dig the character the most. I mean, I really like John Carter. Uh, the character I'm less enthusiastic about is Doc Savage. Actually, I I never had that much interest in the Doc Savage novels. To say they're formulaic is an understatement. Um, Lester Dent or whatever his real name was, um, he he uh, he wrote a formula. I mean, he had a formula. He wrote it down. This happens, then that happens, and this happens, then that happens. And it was like every story is exactly the same because I guess he didn't. He had to write a novel every month and couldn't be bothered to think about plot lines or new plot lines. So he just came up with this, ironclad framework that he used. That must have, I tried to read a few, but after you've read one, the next one is so predictable because of the formula. And I also I just didn't get into Doc Savage because he's like a male Mary Sue. He's just so freaking perfect that there's little suspense in the stories, and I wasn't all that amused by his Fantastic Five or Fabulous Four or whatever the hell his gang of buddies is called. Um, Fun stuff. I love the James Bama covers, but beyond that, really not a lot of interest in Doc Savage. And I'm going to revisit this in sort of this theme in a way as we go on. But it would be interesting to see Doc Savage and Tarzan because I think Tarzan, of all the fictional characters, could knock Doc down a peg or two, at least temporarily. You can't take Doc Savage out forever because that really just violates everything about the character that he could ever be defeated. Which, whatever. Mattel Jones, Beetle Bailey, or Sad Sack. I think I prefer the more surreal one of the two. I'm not sure which one is more surreal. By the way, you're right about YouTube unsubscribing people. I've had to resubscribe to ACD at least twice in the last few months. There you go. There's your testimony. YouTube is out to get me. Oh. Beetle Bailey was a regular comic strip when I was a kid, and I've read some collections like Beetle Bailey from year one. And you may not know this, but Beetle Bailey started out as like a teen humor strip, a la Archie. He was a layabout. He was an idle teen, riding around his hot rod, hanging out with his friends, trying to date girls and everything else. And he introduced his sister Lois and her boyfriend. Hi, they may sound familiar. The strip was fun and funny, but began to lose readership. And so Mort Walker thought, I got to shake things up. And so he has Beetle get drafted. And then it became a military, strip, a military humor strip, a service comedy strip from that point on. And the early years of it, there's some really, really funny stuff. It was a really, really funny strip. And then it sort of got into a kind of a rut and just became another one of the, I Hate Mondays kind of newspaper strips. But I remember when I was a kid in elementary school, there was a strip one day, we all read the comics. Every kid in class read the comics. And there was one that made enough of an impression that we talked about it the next day. We were all thought it was really cool. It's a rare reference in Beetle Bailey to an actual ongoing military conflict. And in the strip, Sarge challenges the Beetle and his pals, the unit, to come up with the best way to disarm an attacker. And Beetle suggests a phrase that's obviously in some sort of Asian characters. And Sarge says, what does that mean? And he goes, it's Vietnamese for your shoes are untied. And we thought that was hysterical. And then it referenced the Vietnam War, which was ongoing. Something the strip never did again. I imagine there were letters out the wazoo to all the newspapers that ran this because Walker never, ever, ever mentioned the Vietnam War ever again. Never, not even in the most oblique reference to it. But we all thought it was the coolest Beetle Bailey strip ever. Now, as far as Sad Sack Sad Sack. Sad Sack was created by George Baker during World War II. It ran as a series of spot gags in, I believe, Yank magazine during World War II. It was quite popular. Following the war, there were lots of collections of the cartoons sold to GIs who fondly remembered it from their time in the service. And it became a Harvey regular series of comic books, which they must have been popular because they had a monthly, and there were lots of specials and collections and annuals and spin-offs and all the rest of it. So they must have sold a lot of these comics. I would pick one up every once in a while when I was a kid, if like I'd read every other comic on the spinner rack. I'd pick one up every once in a while, and I was generally disappointed. They, like most Harvey comics, they were written for very, very young children. And I think I'd outgrown that level of humor. There was nothing to appreciate there for me. I didn't find it very funny. I found the stories to be ludicrous. I was a big fan of service comedy. I never missed an episode of McHale's Navy. I love Sergeant Bilko. All the other service comedies, including military humor movies, I really dug. But Sad Sack, the comic, just didn't seem to have anything going for it, to my mind. Kevin Cruz. In the geek world, we like our conjectures. We like to work scenarios that haven't been explored in the books. Who would win in a fight? Who could lift Thor's hammer? How would a character be if he had someone else's powers? The list goes on. Even Stan Lee, in one of his Stan's rants, has put those questions to bed by answering, it depends on what the script writer wants. Do you like this according to the writer answer, or do you prefer to have limitations set by the editor? Some friends say that creating rules to control what is possible. Others say it restrains creativity. You have to have some sort of level of restrictions to your character. There are ground rules of their abilities and their limitations, and it has to be built into the character, and it has to be some degree of consistency, unless it's agreed with the licensor, the editor, the publisher, or whatever, that we're going to make a change, that we're going to amp this character up or draw down this character's powers. I mean, I'm strictly about powers, but powers, abilities can go beyond, being able to fly or see through walls or whatever. There has to be some consistency to what the character can and cannot do. If your character is really, really smart, he has to always be really, really smart. Now, lazy writers will have smart characters do dumb things just to advance the storyline, and that's lazy. You have to find another reason why the character made that error or whatever. And guess what? If you come up with a reason why your really, really smart character did something dumb, that's story grist. That creates interest. Were they distracted? Were they going through a personal crisis? Were they perhaps being drugged by somebody? Or did they have a head injury that they haven't told anybody about? And this is the reason why they aren't as with it as they were before. And that's all story possibilities. But to just simply have a character be stupid is stupid. Now, some characters have to be stupid all the time, and you don't want them to ever suddenly get smart just to advance the plot line. So it's the opposite effect. So you have to figure out your character's limitations and abilities and kind of stick with that. Now, a character like Superman, his abilities grew over time. They kind of kept adding things like X-ray vision and heat vision and making him super fast. And Superman just got stronger and stronger and stronger until eventually in a reboot, John Byrne's reboot, they sort of dialed him down a little bit so that he wasn't able to lift ocean liners over his head like he had earlier. His powers were amazing, but not quite godlike. And that all makes sense. But that all has to be decided upon. And ideally, it's decided upon by the editor and the creators. They get together and go, look, he can do this, he can't do that. We're going to get rid of this power and replace it with this power, blah, 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 blah. So the character's not absolutely perfect, and his powers don't become a deus ex machina that always solve the problem. And that was the thing about Superman, is the challenge of writing Superman is to create not feats of strength, because he's always going to win in a feat of strength, but to come up with intellectual problems, things that have to be solved intellectually, mysteries, puzzles. DC was great at that. coming up with challenges, mental challenges for Superman, because he's a smart guy, but he doesn't know everything. He's not the, so his in addition to his incredible strength and being able to fly and all the rest of it, there's an element of judgment that comes in. Am I on the right side? Am I doing the right thing? Is there a better way to do this? Is there a way to do this that doesn't involve blunt force? How many times have we seen a situation where Superman has to decide between getting the bad guy and rescuing the people the bad guys put in peril? Those kind of things. And to have those stories make sense and have those stories be effective and suspenseful, the reader has to know the limitations of that character's power. If he's just perfect, then who cares? It's like when I, killed Green Arrow, I killed Oliver Queen, for all intents and purposes. And I was tasked with the editors to come up with a trap that Superman could not rescue Ollie from. And so I had to think a lot about Superman's abilities, his limitations, and the rest of it as he tries to solve a puzzle, a quite lethal puzzle, as it turned out in the end. Now, as an example of inconsistency, I can't think of a better example than Independence Day, the first Independence Day movie, in which we're introduced to this alien race, which apparently can just kill people at will. A room full of humans has no chance against one of these aliens. And then 30 minutes later in the film, Will Smith, who couldn't even knock Chris Rock to the floor, is just kicks an alien's ass all by himself. This is a level of inconsistency that takes you right out of the story, and then you kind of lose interest in the story because you're like, if they're just going to pull stuff out of their butt like this, well, why do I care what happens next? There's no element of suspense, and that's really what it gets down to. Is your reader, your viewer, your listener, whatever, has to know this character, has to know what they can and cannot do. It has to know the rules. It's always important in horror stories. What are the rules for vampires? Can't go out during the day. They don't like garlic. Stake to the heart kills them. Beheading them kills them. All these different rules. And it's really what makes the whole thing work, because you're introducing story complications for your lead characters if they're vampires. They can't enter a house they haven't been invited into. Things like this create stories, create terrific situations. If you just say, okay, well, now we're going to forget about that because it's inconvenient for the story. We can't advance the story if that's going to be the difficulty. You're just a really lazy writer. You need to find another job. Switistan. I really want to say, give me your top 5 in any order of your favorite character actors of the 70s and another top 5 from the 80s, TV and movies included, meaning you could put the guy who played Angel in Rockford with Warren Oates and the list works. I'm really hoping to come away with some movies to watch, particular performances or actors I may have missed, and you always have such an interesting quality suggestions in every medium you discuss. I think you say you really want to say, give me your top 5 character actors, but I think what you really, really want is some movie suggestions. And I'm going to give you some movie suggestions from the early 70s. Let's start with the early 70s. Maybe I'll make this a regular feature. Does everybody want this to be a regular feature? Show of hands. So starting in the early 70s, and I'm gonna suggest some movies that you may not have ever heard of. And there will be a character actor element to each one. First, I'm going to start with is The Ballad of Cable Hogue. This is 1970. And The Ballad of Cable Hogue was Sam Peckinpah's follow-up to The Wild Bunch. And it features Jason Robards as a guy who's left for dead in the desert, but then finds a waterhole. And he turns that waterhole into his fortune as he makes it into a stagecoach stop. So he has taken a near-death experience and turned it into something profitable for himself. And it's kind of like Sam Peckinpah's John Huston movie. It's very much like a John Huston kind of movie. And pretty soon, he runs into the town prostitute who he convinces to come out and will live with him for a while, played by Stella Stevens. And it's because it's Sam Peckinpah, you would expect it to be a bit of a treat on the character actor front. And here we have reunited L.Q. Jones and Strother Martin from their appearance in The Wild Bunch. You also have David Warner, Slim Pickens, R.G. Armstrong, and Gene Evans. All terrific character actors. So 1970 Ballad of Cable Hogue, you might want to check that one out. Next one is The Last Valley. This is a bit of an obscure movie. Hold on here. I got a list here. Okay, Last Valley stars Michael Caine and Omar Sharif, and it's a real oddball kind of movie. It's written and directed by James Clavell, the guy that wrote Shogun. This is from 1971. Michael Caine is the captain of a group of mercenaries during the 30 Years' War, a war that most Americans don't know a damn thing about. And in this story, his mercenary band are basically trying to escape the Black Plague, which is all over Europe. And they wander into this mountain valley. It looks like it's in Austria. And this isolated mountain valley that's untouched by the plague. It's this village of farmers. And they're going to spend the winter there. They're going to escape the war. They're going to escape the plague and just sort of chill out, raping and pillaging in one place instead of wandering around to do it. And it's very suspenseful. It's got kind of a nasty feel to it as well, but it's a great movie. And, big outdoor action against the sky stuff, a lot of suspense. Is Michael Caine just going to let this group just run wild? Omar Sharif is a drifter who winds up in the village. He's a starving drifter who takes on the role of a priest, even though he's not one. It's a cool movie, and a lot of people have never seen it. In addition to Sharif and Michael Caine, Florinda Balkan, character actress, Europe, Nigel Davenport, Arthur O'Connell, American character actor, who seems a little bit out of place in this movie. Probably seems more in place in if he's dubbed in German or French. And too briefly, Brian Blessed is in this movie. Brian Blessed, who always makes an impression, makes an enormous impression in this movie, but sadly isn't in it very long. But it's definitely worth checking out. The next movie is 1972 Fuzz. Fuzz is basically a Burt Reynolds vehicle. It's written by Evan Hunter, which is a pen name for his other pen name, Ed McBain. And this is an Ed McBain 87th Precinct movie with Burt Reynolds playing Steve Carella. And Ed McBain, the main character, the main cop in the 87th Precinct thing. And it's very 70s from its theme, its music with lots of wah-wah pedal in it. And it also stars Raquel Welch. So it's kind of a Burt Reynolds, Raquel Welch team-up movie. It's a vehicle for both of them. Unfortunately, there's no chemistry between the two characters because Raquel Welch absolutely detested Burt Reynolds and refused to be in scenes with him. So they very rarely ever appear together on camera. Things had to be rewritten. Carella's character had to be replaced by Tom Skerritt, playing Detective Burt Kling, so that, Raquel Welch didn't have to put up with being around Burt Reynolds for whatever reason. I've never discovered why. Maybe I'll have to read Raquel Welch's book and find out why she didn't like Burt too much. But this one too is a bit of a feast for character actor fans, with Jack Weston. I mentioned Tom Skerritt, James McKeechan, Steve Inhat, Dan Frazier, and Burt Remsen, and someone else. Hold on here. I made a list. Brian Doyle Murray appears briefly as a detective. Blink and you miss him. And Peter Bonaires, who you may remember as the dentist on the Bob Newhart show, shows up in a role. Okay, next one up is Slither. This is a James Caan vehicle based on his, this is 73, This is based on his popularity from the Godfather movies, so they gave him a vehicle of his own. And it's directed by a director who, up until this point, had only directed television commercials. And it was much anticipated because he was the director of a series of very funny, very popular Volkswagen commercials. And Slither is a very laconically placed story about James Caan. He's a recently released convict looking for some hidden loot, and it sets its own pace. It's very deliberately paced. The humor is very dry in it. I really like it. I've seen it a number of times. I really like the feel of it. Caan is great as a kind of a John Paul Belmondo character in it. He's very easygoing, even though you realize he's a tough guy, but he doesn't feel a need to exhibit that all the time. And it's got some funny stuff in it. It's an oddball, almost a art film kind of thing. And but I really enjoy it. And again, it's a lot of great character actors: Sally Kellerman, Peter Boyle, Louise Lasser, the former Mrs. Woody Allen, Alan Garfield, Richard B. Schull, and Alex Rocco are all in the cast. And it's fun stuff. It's worth checking out. It's probably on some streaming service somewhere. And that's 73. Now we go to 74. It's a movie called Man on a Swing. It's a Frank Perry movie. And it kind of predates the kind of serial killers movies that we would see in the 90s. Cliff Robertson is a small town sheriff trying to solve a string of murders. These women are being basically picked up everywhere and killed. And he's a small town sheriff. He's never dealt with anything like this before, and he's kind of flummoxed. And the story of these murders is just starting to get out to the media and everything else, and they draw the attention of a number of people. He's got suspects. He can't prove anything. He's really at a dead end until Joel Grey shows up. And Joel Grey is a psychic, and he says he can help. And apparently he's got psychic abilities. He's got information about these murders that he couldn't possibly know. Evidence that the police have kept secret. Evidence the police don't have yet. He really, really knows a lot about these crimes, and sort of works his way into the department and gets their trust. And maybe you can already see where this story's going, but it's a really good creepy movie without any melodrama. It doesn't work hard to be creepy. It just sort of draws you into the experiences of these people and just gives you this feeling of rising dread as the movie goes on. And it's very much, it's kind of European in feel to its pacing and everything else, which really works for this movie. It's not a, booyah, big surprise, shocker kind of movie. It's more a cat and mouse think piece of detection, police procedural movie. And I highly recommend it. So, hey, if you like just getting film recommendations with or without the character actor list, and by the way, Lane Smith is in this. He's the only real other character actor other than Joel Grey that we would recognize the name of. Lane Smith, who played Perry Mason on the Lois and Clark TV series. Anyway, if you want to see more of this, let me know. Let me know down here in the comments, down here right below this video. And one more thing. I mentioned earlier I would get back to this kind of theme with Doc Savage and Tarzan. And it's funny, Graham is a huge Doc Savage fan, and I'm not. And we just agreed to disagree on so many things. And we were on a podcast together, and we were promoting Joe Frankenstein and the launch of Joe Frankenstein Volume 3. And the subject of movies kept coming up, and a movie would come up and Graham would go, "Oh, I hate that movie," and I would go, "Oh man, I love that movie." And it happened so many times that after we got off the air, and I'm just like on my own thinking, I thought, wow, there's so many movies Graham and I are on polar opposites about. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. Now, there's a number of movies we really both like, but there's some standouts. He doesn't like the remake of John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. He likes Liberty Valance, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. He does not like the movie Rio Bravo. The list goes on and on and on, and it's like, so I began to wonder, how the hell have the two of us worked together so long if we have a different approach we have a different set of standards for entertainment? How the hell have we ever worked together? It doesn't seem like there's common ground when it comes to particularly stories featuring heroes. And I realized, of course, we worked together because we found common ground. First of all, our main longest collaboration was on Batman, and we were in agreement on Batman, or at least we were like 98% in agreement on Batman, until Graham convinced me to just come over to his side and be 100%. So our Venn diagram on Batman became just a circle, and but we had differing opinions on various characters within the series, but we worked it out. But I realized that every time he and I have collaborated on like creator-owned stuff, the ideas have always begun with Graham, and then I'm brought on board. Joe Frankenstein is very much a Graham Nolan show. It was his initial idea, and then he talked to me, and in Graham's initial iteration, I'm not telling tales out of school, Graham's talked about this himself. In his initial iteration, Joe Frankenstein was very much a Doc Savage character. Very much a male Mary Sue. He was perfect and manly and super duper and masculine, and all the girls loved him. And Graham was frustrated in his abilities to try to sell this property to various publishers, to try to get them interested in publishing it. And he talked to me about it, and I said, well, maybe what you're trying to do is a little tired. The really fascinating character in Joe Frankenstein is the monster. So you have this super duper heroic figure. He's competing for attention with the monster. Why not have a character that is complementary? And at the time, Harry Potter was everything. Everything was Harry Potter. Phenomenal publishing success. The movies are hits. Everything about it. And I said, well, why don't you think about a young character, a teenager? And it sort of evolved from there. And I realized that that's when the two of us are together. That's basically what I'm bringing to the party. Is not a flawed character, not a character with a feet of clay, but a character more liable to maybe make mistakes. A character who needs to grow. A character who is still evolving. Joe Pratt is very much an evolving character in the series. He's learning, he's growing, everything else. And I think that's more relatable and more fun than a fully grown man in full. And I think that's why our collaboration works. He brings, the oomph, the pulp sensibilities, that energy, and everything else. And I'm bringing hey, wait a minute, what if this? Let's ponder the imponderables. And I think that's why we work together well. And I think, he appreciates that in me. I certainly appreciate his abilities to a tremendous degree. But it's why we could probably never go to the movies together. Because we just see things differently, which I think that's what makes it work. That we, because you don't want to collaborate with someone who's exactly like you, because have you ever met anybody that's exactly like you, or that you're willing to admit is exactly like you, or very close to your personality? You usually don't like them. But I like Graham. I love him like a brother because he's different. He's different from me. He's a different cat, and that's what makes our collaborations interesting. I'm not saying we ever fight. or there's any animosity, but there's some rough and tumble when we're putting something together for you folks. There's some give and take. There's some disagreement. Graham usually wins because he's never backed down Nolan. But, I'm cool with that. I'm cool with that because especially when the projects are his, when he's started it, he started the ball rolling. He got this Joe Frankenstein thing going and various other things that we've worked on together. When he's gotten them going, it's like, yeah, this is your baby. I'm just here to maybe look after it for a while, or babysit. Make sure it doesn't wander into traffic. So anyway, that's it for this week. I want to thank you for listening. I want to thank you for watching, liking, subscribing, whatever you did. And I hope to see all of you down the road.